But for the moment, he's our hero, Professor Richard Wolff, who joins me from the United States. Professor, I'd like to begin by asking you the $64,000 question, though it's a lot more dollars than that. What happened to Silicon Valley Bank, and what does it mean for the rest of us?
Well, I wish I could say it was unique or special or rare. It's none of those things. It's a very common occurrence. The only amazing thing to most of us is that we as a society here in the United States permit this situation to continue. Let me explain. Banks many, many decades ago proved to the American people, as they have in your country and everywhere else, that they cannot be trusted with something as important as the money that makes the world go around. Since they are private capitalist enterprises, profit is their number one priority. Profit is their bottom line. They use the monetary system to make money. That's their priority. That means that they take risks. Here's the basic risk. They take in the money of depositors, individuals and businesses, paying as little as possible for that. They turn around and lend the depositors' money back to the depositors and businesses in the form of loans. They are proverbial middlemen, and they make their income by taking in as much as possible at the lowest rates and lending it out at the highest possible rates. All of that is very charming unless and until they get into difficulty. For example, the depositors want their money back. Well, they can't get it because it's been lent out. So we require banks to have their own capital so they can cover that kind of situation. The problem is that if ever a really large number of their depositors want the money back, and that's exactly what happened in Silicon Valley, California with that bank, then they are in difficulty. They have to liquidate their investments. But here's the problem. The investments of that bank were largely in government bonds. They lend to the government. Why? Because the government is in such difficulty here that it has to spend trillions of dollars more than it dares tax the population. So they borrow. So banks invest in those loans. Their bonds is what they're called. But they go up and down in value. So what has happened is that bank lost depositors, had to liquidate bonds at unfavorable prices. The rest of the banking world became aware of this because we don't regulate the banks properly, and then you had the collapse. It is a small version of what happened in 2008 and 9. And the great question this weekend, rattling New York City, where I sit, and the whole country, is how bad will this get? How long will this last? How many other banks are hiding the same situation that can no longer be hidden by the bank in Silicon Valley, which has, I assume you know, been liquidated? It's out of existence. It's utterly bankrupt. This is a sign. No one should miss it. It comes 3 or 4 weeks after another failure of a private enterprise or of the government regulation to keep us safe. That was in the little town of East Palestine, Ohio, when a private profit railroad cut corners on safety, destroyed a community, thereby exposing that the government supposedly regulating them has been captured by those it's supposed to regulate, and so it doesn't do its job. But this has happened over and over. It's an endless repetition of a fundamental flaw in our system. You cannot have the social welfare protected if the people charged with doing that have a private profit objective, which is a higher priority for them. That contradiction has never been faced and never been resolved, giving us an endless series of these kinds of breakdowns, which will ramify and ripple across this country.
One of what you've just described so eloquently was featured in one of the most important books I read as a teenager, The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist. It was described by Owen, the hero of the book, as the great money trick. You take £1 from someone, you lend it 10 or 100 or 1,000 times, and you pay the man whose pound it is as little as possible, and you charge the people you've lent it to as much as possible. It is the great money trick that you have just described there, and yet it is fundamental to our economic system. Now, they laugh at people like you and me who say that our economic system is fundamentally rotten and must one day come tumbling down, and that we must be able to come up with a better one. In that sense, what's happened all over again would be good news, Professor, except that it's going to devastate perhaps thousands, maybe millions of people across the Western world over the next few weeks.
Absolutely. And let me assure you, and those that are watching your program, this weekend, yesterday and today, all other business here in New York City, which is the economic and financial capital of the United States, if not of much of the world, all other business has been thrown away. There's a panic, an anxiety. The question is, how much money is the government going to need once again to bail out the private capitalist system when it flounders, when its contradictions catch up with it? How much other business will not be done? How serious will the efforts be? How many others are suffering already? How many bankers are running for the exits? Most of those questions will not be answered anytime soon. The terrible beginning of the stock market tomorrow morning is the deadline against which hysterical people, some of whom I know personally, are working in the government offices to save, once again, to save capitalism from itself, because that's their job, because they are Republicans and Democrats, and we haven't yet understood that we not only do we not have a loyal opposition, we don't have any opposition at all in terms of the power, which is why it is so disconnected from the realities that are now so frightening the United States.
Well, we may be two peoples divided by a common language, but we are entirely united by the fact we each have a unipolar parliament and government with no opposition at all. And yet, Professor, this very evening, Joe Biden and the White House tweeted that under President Biden, the economy, the American economy, is headed in the right direction. Well, it looks to me like it's headed down an Ohio railroad to a crash.
It is genuinely, for me, embarrassing. I'll give you a personal glimpse. I was a graduate student at a university here in the United States getting my PhD in economics. The university, I don't mind telling you, Yale University. A classmate of mine, a young woman, like I was a young man, her name was, Janet Yellen. She took the same courses from the same professors in the same room that I did. I know what she knows. I know she knows our economy is in among the worst periods of its life and its whole history. Let me be very quick with you. Our inflation is roaring ahead and no one knows how to stop it. The decision made by the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates compounds the problem, because now middle income and poor people who can't afford to pay the rising prices are confronted with higher interest rates, which limit what they can do with their credit card, limit whether they can buy an automobile, block them from buying a home, with the ramifying economic consequences of all this. All that you have with Mr. Biden is the normal behavior of our politicians who, when they're in power, everything is going well, and when they're out of power, everything is being badly managed by the other side. No one pays attention. No one believes them. They intone this nonsense because they don't know what else to do. We weren't supposed to have an inflation. We were told it was all under control by, among others, Janet Yellen. Now we are told, well, it is everybody else's fault, and we're going to raise interest rates. We've been doing it very fast for the last 8 or 9 months, and it hasn't stopped our inflation. And it's a good sign we're about to go into a recession in this year, if we're not already in it. Meanwhile, we're losing the war in Ukraine. I mean, the reality is this is a country that is more and more frightened by the sequence, the accumulation of bad news, of scary developments, of frightening possibilities, capped off when our leaders talk casually about the pros and cons of nuclear war. You really have a sense that we're all going off the rails here, and I don't mind telling you, watching yesterday when the Chinese broker a peace agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, for those Americans who pay attention, not only are we in ever deeper difficulty, but our so-called adversaries are doing better and better, and achievement after achievement. Even our propaganda machines are unable to overcome the reality that leaks into our consciousness. And so I'm reporting to you from a country that is more and more feeling, and people say it to each other on the streets, everything is falling apart. What is happening? And they're looking for scapegoats. They are looking for magical solutions. They are hoping somehow this will straighten out. And yet the next one comes, and the next one comes, and the next one comes. It is an extraordinary period. Please don't be befuddled, anybody, by the comments of our political leaders. Between their self-serving and their out of touch with the rest of us, it is kind of a mysterious process of trying to figure out what they're doing through the fog of what they say.
Professor Wolff, you truly are the master. Thanks for that lesson for the students of the mother of all talk shows. Much obliged to you. Thanks for joining us.